Hello, everybody. I know I was hoping for a lot more, but that's great. But we have a very interesting session today. Probably we did not advertise it very well, but the key session that we're going to talk about is actually very pragmatic and prescriptive experience from the industry. And it will talk about what it takes to do AI. And if you are going to do AI, how are you going to handle it? I mean, what are the challenges, what are the benefits, and how go about doing it? And to make that happen, we have actually 3 industry leaders today in the meeting. And it would be a panel discussion. Number 1 is Ken Priyadarshi. He is a global tax prompt engineering leader from EY. We also have Victor D'Souza. He's a managing director for data insights and app at Applied Materials. We also have Rajeev Nayar, VP and Unit Technology Officer for Infosys with significant industry experience. And myself, Ashish Mehta from Infosys Data Analytics Practice, responsible for the practice globally. So in this panel discussion, we'll go through a whole bunch of experiences that our clients, esteemed clients had, and also share what it takes to do data and AI, how they went about going through the journey. To set a quick context, I'm going to take a minute to talk about Infosys Topaz. Infosys Topaz is a AI offering that we launched for our clients to drive business transformation with data and AI. And the key difference is that it's an AI-first offering where you focus on AI before actually focusing on anything else. So what does Topaz include? Topaz is about 12,000 solution and accelerators which we take to market and are AI-driven. It also has about 120 models which are being trained with Gen AI and other technologies which clients can leverage. So this is a solution that this is a solution and a brand that we are taking to market to drive business transformation. Now, quickly going on to the panel discussion, and I'll start with Ken yourself. So Ken, So Ken, while Infosys has been partnering with EY with respect to data analytics and driving AI across EY, can you talk about the journey and the initiatives that you are driving at EY?
Are you going to turn on? Oh, there we go. So I think that I really liked what you had in the Topaz first approach about connecting ecosystems. We are looking at that in the context of a CFO transformation agenda. And there's actually a great paper from the Mack Institute, from the Wharton Strategic CFO Customer Program that says that the real connector of ecosystems at Fortune 500s is actually the CFO. Not potentially the chief data officer, the CIO, or even the CTO, but the CFO. Think about what happened during the pandemic, right? Resiliency challenges, et cetera. Suddenly, all the CFOs wanted to get access to supply chain data. Suddenly, a lot of FP&A talks started coming around the ideas of, gee, how do we correlate what's going to happen to our future cash flows? And how do we make that more resilient in the context of what's happening in our supplier ecosystem? And so there's actually a great book from the Mack Institute of the CFO program around this context of connected strategies, not unlike connected ecosystems from Topaz. And so we said that, gee, we should think about data and AI in the context of driving the CFO transformation agenda. Because if we do that, we will have inevitably influenced the COO, the CIO, the CTO, all these agendas, including BEU leaders. And so it wasn't so much the technical conversation as much as sort of the BU-driven transformation in the context of finance that drove a lot of what we've been working on. If you just Google EY and AI, there's a couple of recent articles that were published about us by Fortune magazine. We introduced something called the payroll chatbot, which is an Azure OpenAI generative AI use case. We talked about tax copilot AI. So a lot of this is happening very quickly, and we're going very quickly again, with the mindset of a CFO transformation agenda. And you heard it actually at the keynote as well, right? Our logo was somewhere up there. This idea around accelerating data mesh architectures with governed algorithms. We think that it's inevitable that you look inside every major Fortune 500, there are already silos. And to bring that together, there's an inevitability towards data mesh architectures. So why not have that coupled with governed algorithms, establish data contracts, and then maybe, just maybe, as you saw today with Lakehouse IQ, start using generative AI to start connecting those silos together in a federated fashion. That's at the heart of something we're calling our CFO co-pilot strategy. And that's what we're pushing for these days.
Thanks, Ked. My next question is for Victor. Victor, we know that AMAT has actually done a fabulous job with respect to building the data foundation, which is cloud first, digital first, driving business transformation. Can you talk also about the AI initiatives and the AI journey which AMAT is taking?
Thanks for having me. Everybody, can you hear me loud and clear? All right, so I'll just jog back in memory a little bit because the journey has been very interesting. We were a traditional IT organization where everything from getting the data together, massaging it, manipulating it, exposing it through reports and dashboards were all done by IT. We went from that state to being in a state where we've got a foundational data platform, which is more than 3 petabytes in size. On an average, we pump more than 1 terabytes of information, of data in a day. And every aspect of this platform, as it relates to data processing, mashing up data sets that's relevant for business, for folks who understand this data set better, now lies in the hands of the business units, including the visualization portion. We went from being an extremely descriptive reporting, I don't even know if we can call it analytics, to moving into the diagnostic, to the predictive and prescriptive space. Cognitive analytics remains a dream that we continue to pursue. But on those lines, our data foundation, which is the backbone on which we build an analytics organization. If you notice, we've got more than 30-odd machine learning models that we productionalize today. And in subsequent discussion and subsequent questions, we'll talk about, at a high level, what those models do for us. We've got patents filed against those models. We've got a very, very rich community of data scientists, again, work with the BUs, work with the knowledge of the data lies, enable them to use the enterprise data lake, use the foundational elements of data science workbench, put the models together, train them, test them, and deploy them. So 30-odd models deployed, a number of patents filed, and significant, I would say, progress that we've made in our journey towards being an AI-enabled organization.
Thanks, Victor. My next question is for Rajeev yourself. So Rajeev, you're seeing a lot of customers taking the AI journey and Gen AI journey, and especially Gen AI these days. So how is Infosys actually, or how you see adoption of Gen AI and AI across enterprises?
So, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So part of the Infosys journey you already touched on was to bring together a brand that we call Topaz, where we have bought all the assets possible to help across the company to help our customers in the AI-first transformation. But broadly, this is kind of funny. This classification between AI, Gen AI, some people use the classification of discriminative models versus generative models. There are people who talk about classical AI versus your generative AI as this whole transformation that we're going through. And in fact, the funny one is there are some people who talk to me about legacy AI and then generative AI. So it's sort of the spectrum that we see across the board. So, but broadly, what we have seen when customers actually implement it is not swinging one way or the other. Ken sort of refer to this. It's always a combination of your traditional AI, so to say, combined with things that generative AI can do that actually builds your solution. We see this a lot. We see this a lot in terms of sometimes generative AI creating the content and then being processed in an intelligent manner with your AI solutions beyond that or the other way around. What we have done, we looked at the space and we were able to look at how generative AI will make a difference. And the simplest way to look at it is in terms of the left brain and the right brain. On one side, we are going to use this in an immediate sense to increase our productivity and profits, maximize what we can. And on the other side, for disruptive and creative changes, the Copilot is an example of a disruptive change where it's in some cases it's writing the code, in other cases it's becoming augmentation to be able to write the code. There are marketing situations. For example, one of our customers, they wanted to use the picture of the cat that they use on their marketing material in different scenarios, but they did not want to take a picture of the cat again. So now you use generative AI in those cases to actually create this content with these different scenarios with the same image. So there are some very practical uses that people are putting this to. But this idea that there are a set of disruptive cases that can create huge business value, and the other side where you can actually increase productivity and maximize profits in the short term is how we are seeing the adoption of this. As we go ahead, again, referring to what Ken was talking about, we do see this sort of evolving into what we call multiple of these co-pilots coming into play. We call it AI twins. So if you think about it, you think about skills that you're automating, right? Kind of like your Alexa and skills model. So people are, you're training the system to have skills that can augment what people do. And together they can actually achieve a certain task a lot more efficiently. So that's sort of, we call it AI twins. It's Copilot in some other parts of the industry, but that's how we see this evolving, multiple of these Copilots coming into the picture.
Thanks, Rajeev. So Ken, I think that was a great description on what we are doing from a EY and especially tax business perspective. But I'm sure, I mean, the adoption of AI needs to be across the enterprise. And so what are the challenges that you're facing, I mean, across EY to do a broad adoption of AI? And did you go through those challenges even in your tax portfolio?
No challenges at all. No, I'm just kidding. No, we partnered with you, actually. We had to go work with industry leaders, such as your Topaz program, Microsoft, Databricks, et cetera. I think, as we just talked about here, the world is very quickly moving towards a multi-bot orchestration sort of reality. But even before we get there, the mess that we existed in, not just our mess, but everybody's mess, because we also manage our clients' mess sometimes. Well, very often we do. We are actually living in a world, I think, of multiple data pipelines, right? So the first question we had was, hey, data ops, ML ops, how do we almost look at that as these container bundles that we can productize, and so that a business unit or an operating unit comes to us and says, hey, I have this data lineage, this data lifecycle I need to manage that's unique, and it's only unique for my business, and nobody else has this sort of data problem. And we often say, do you still do ingest, process, transform, and present it? Because if you do, it sounds very similar to everybody else's data pipeline, right? So I think the data ops lifecycle and the ML ops lifecycle almost had to be viewed as internal products, which we bundled using open source standards such as CNAB, which is a container native application bundling technology, et cetera. And we said, we're going to we're going to democratize that, and then we're going to create a central governance mechanism around that. And so we started calling that MLOps as a service. And that, quite frankly, has been the reason why we were able to push the envelope quickly into doing generative AI in partnership with Microsoft and Databricks around a lot of our work. We think of a lot of these products almost as patterns on the Azure ecosystem that we can press a button on, deploy for an OU or a BU, and then connect them through some form of a universal governance tower, not unlike what you saw demoed earlier today, right? So I think the number one thing for us when it came to adoption was looking at these pipelines as an ecosystem across OUs and BUs and being able to see them as a data telemetry opportunity, and then being able to create container bundles around them that you can deploy. We also, I think, had to work very quickly to see that different people had different toolkits that they were using. We had people who were more than happy doing everything on their laptop. We had people who wanted Azure ML. We had people who wanted Azure Databricks. We had people who wanted some vendor whose name I cannot pronounce, but they're probably here in this with a booth here somewhere. How do we connect them? And that comes back to something you heard earlier today about this concept of Lakehouse Federation. So, goes back to, I think, what you opened with, right? How do we connect these data and AI and ML ecosystems? We've been calling it MLOps as a service. I think now we're moving towards the world of LLM ops as a service, as per the demo you guys saw earlier today.
Thanks, Ken. So, Victor, next question is for you. And actually, AMAT, Applied Materials, is actually seen as a leader in the semicon industry. And often we see that rest of the industry, especially the semicon manufacturing, tries to follow you. Now that you are actually seen as a leader, and I'm sure you are expected to lead the whole industry from an AI perspective, what are the challenges that you are coming across to address it?
So yes, we are a semiconductor giant, if you will, from an capital equipment standpoint. But unfortunately, we don't have a name of a fruit company on us, right? So we're not well known. If you're not into consumer electronics, if you're not there right in front of an end customer, you probably don't have the brand value that you wish you had. And hence, talent war becomes that much more challenging for us. Right? Attracting talent, retaining talent, and as the ecosystem is evolving rapidly, I mean, I didn't think we'd live to see the day we'd call legacy AI. I'd like to call it classic ML, if you will, right? Because back in the day, not too long back, it was one of the coolest things out there. Now we're already calling it legacy, classic, and all that nomenclature is attached to it. So how do you stay relevant from a business, from a technology standpoint, bring those kind of capabilities to your business community? I think apart from the talent war, with the advent of Gen AI, the first thing that I think, like most companies, we ended up doing was block all kind of capabilities related to. If it had Gen AI, any kind of LLM listed in it, our first reaction was stop. Why? Because like most companies, we were extremely concerned about leaking our IP. But as we went about evaluating these capabilities in a more guarded, and my friends from legal like to remind me, it's more prudent approach of ensuring, whilst we look at the capability to give ourselves the leg up, both within the enterprise and maybe incorporate some of these solutions in the tool, how do we ensure we don't leak our IP? We, at the senior management level at Applied, identified Gen AI LLMs from a two-pronged perspective. One is the lack of adoption. What does it mean to us in terms of losing the competitive edge? The second is the exact opposite of that. If we adopt it, and if we don't do it in a guarded manner, what happens to the IP leakage, the risk of that, right? So working with our friends from legal and security, we are going about that evaluation, and we are slowly but surely moving in a direction where identifying those use case criteria, keeping security, legal in mind, right? The laws haven't caught up yet. What happens when you create content, when you build something using any of the generative models? Who owns the IP for that? And if any of these capabilities then go into our tool, what happens at customer locations? Do we expose them to any kind of security vulnerabilities on that front? So we're going about it in a prudent manner. We are selectively evaluating those capabilities. And I'm happy to say that we are at a point where whether it is Copilot using Microsoft's as an option, We've come up with criteria where we think the business cases do exist where it can be used to give them that advantage that they seek, as well as using any of OpenAI's APIs. We've gone about that evaluation process to see if we can enable a ask kind of solution for our policy documents, create a knowledge base, give more pointed, guarded responses where it's relevant. We felt, along with these challenges, there are opportunities out there. And the way we went about it was piloting relevant use cases. 4 years, 5 years back, as we started adopting classic ML, if you will, pretty much everything we were doing was build. Now the ecosystem has enriched, has matured enough for buy to be a lot of those options. We have to make that call on a selective basis, in which case do we stick to building those capabilities in-house, because that's where our IP exists, versus what do we tap in from an ecosystem which is becoming extremely rich, whether it is LLM-based or otherwise, or classic ML-based, that we can tap on. But I think the downside for it is how many of these do you bring in-house, right? Because the sustainability of that becomes a challenge. So again, both a pros and cons of that approach that we need to keep an eye out for. Addressing high-value problems. We've seen our customer base swing from being extremely guarded and saying, no, this is not for us, to everything under the sun can be solved using these capabilities. The reality, just like everything else, is somewhere in between. So that's in a nutshell what our risk and challenges and opportunities looks like.
Thanks, Victor. I think your point on the challenges on legal security, I mean, that was well taken. Thanks. Rajeev, the next question is for you. So we heard about some of the journeys and some of the challenges from both Ken and Victor. Can you talk about some of the patterns of adoption that you're seeing across industry with both AI and Gen AI?
So in terms of patterns, we are seeing a number of them come up, whether it is in terms of, I talked about an example of marketing material being created with Gen AI. We have multiple examples. For example, at Infosys, one of the gaps that we found when this whole Gen AI wave caught up was in the context of coding, was we couldn't find a transformer for COBOL. So we decided to invest in building one, right? So we're seeing the same pattern. People to solve specific problems are starting to build LLMs that will satisfy the particular need. We are seeing patterns where, for example, we have the systems that we're monitoring, where we get a lot of the logs, and then you want to find the root cause analysis. So you're doing some amount of analysis and then feeding it to an LLM to actually give you an explanation, or you're processing your data and then asking for an explanation for a particular financial report to an LLM. So it's like I said earlier, the patterns that we are seeing in terms of creative endeavors, there are things that you can do with the LLMs itself or generative AI, but largely we are seeing this pattern where you have a combination of classical and, again, I keep talking about classical, but the regular AI and generative AI coming together to solve a problem. It's almost a situation, and we are actually standardizing this pattern in some senses of, again, this left brain and right brain type of approach. The right brain creative side of actually creating the explanations, creating stuff, is done by the generative AI side of things, whereas the more analytical reasoning, judgment, which are not the strengths of Gen AI, are done by the rest of your system. So that's broadly what we are seeing in terms of patterns, and this is applicable across different areas, right from the business side all the way up to IT problem management as well.
Thanks, Rajeev. So, Victor and Ken both talked about some of the challenges, and there were some commonality in challenges with respect to legal, organization adoption, compliance, and of course, IP and other things. I think there was some mention of responsibility by design and some of the things that, that you have seen. Can you talk a bit about that how Infosys is actually helping some of those challenges?
Yeah. In fact, in the keynote, we heard about this. In the keynote, it was called Responsible AI. Now, I want you to envision a scenario, right? Largely how a lot of AI is being done today without a systemic view in terms of use cases. So you create these use cases that shows value. How are you going to secure it? How are you going to ensure privacy? How are you going to make sure that there is trust, right? And ethics and all these functions. I think Ken alluded to it and Victor talked about it as well. How do you ensure that you're following all these rules in the organization? Are you going to do it on a use case basis, or are you going to embed it into your foundation? And if you see the foundation, this is an interesting aspect. I don't know how many of you caught on to this. Foundation is being talked about in two parts. One is the data foundation and the other is AI foundation, right? So how do you embed these capabilities into this foundation? Basically, this idea of security, privacy, trust, the ability to make sure that your models are not hijacked and all these different capabilities. All of this together is what we call responsible by design. How do you actually create your platforms in such a way that these concerns are built into the platform itself, so that the end consumer is not burdened with having to worry about all of these things. So we brought this together into these patterns. If you see one of the foundations of when we do AI first is this responsible by design, but it is these dimensions and addressing these dimensions at the platform level so that your consumption can scale is what we call responsible by design.
Thanks, Rajeev. So Victor, I think next question is for you. And I think we spoke about how you are driving the journey. But what we didn't talk about from a semicon perspective and AMAT perspective is the use cases for AI. I mean, especially in your sector, which is a unique sector in itself. And as you mentioned that you're not customer facing and people don't see the chat box and all that. But what are the unique use cases that you are driving across industry from a semiconductor perspective, so in fact, from a semicon manufacturing perspective? Can you talk about those?
Absolutely. So, leveraging some of the classic ML approaches, if you will, we believed in drinking our own Kool-Aid or champagne, whatever you want to call it, right? One of the first adoptions was, how do we use our service data in the IT tickets that we get to reduce the number of ticket hops within the IT organization from a support function? Can we provide the folks who are manning our help desk capabilities in terms of responses for issues that have occurred in the past quickly, reduce the cycle time that it takes? We started off with that. Venturing into the space of logistics, inventory management, warehouse management. Think about the challenges. I mean, unfortunately, we're not Amazon that sells hundreds of millions of SKUs a day. We sell limited of those, but the spare parts that goes into those equipments is huge. Some of our bill of materials are as deep or as complex as Boeing's 18-level deep bombs. Think of the spare part, the supply chain that is required to support it, and the associated logistics cost. So optimizing the size of these handling containers, if you will, optimizing the path that a person in a warehouse takes to go pick those parts, pack them, and ship them. On an average, a person in a warehouse walks roughly around 15 miles a day. 45 of these per shift, tens of these warehouses around the world. Are they taking the right path in terms of the time that they take, apart from their well-being, the time that, time and money that Applied spends in ensuring that we do it efficiently? That's where we started adopting some of these capabilities. The holy grail for us, of course, is as these capabilities get deployed at the edge. Because as we are going about evaluating these capabilities on Azure, working with Google and others, The biggest challenge that we are facing is a lot of our fabs where these capabilities will be enabled are going to be firewalled. It's airtight. Without access, as you can imagine why, because that's where the Holy Grail is. That's where the IP is. Working with the likes of Samsung, TSMC, Intel, and all the others, we will not be in a position for us to deploy capabilities in the cloud and those capabilities to be availed on the fly. That's where we are evaluating a bunch of options using LLM open source models, where from an optimization of yield, recommendations as far as where do defects probably occur, how can we predict them, how can we reduce them, how do we deploy these capabilities, how do we deploy them, operationalize them, and deploy them at the edge is what we are focusing on, right? So again, we've learned a lot of these lessons during our evaluation phase using some of these advanced techniques. The challenge for us now is how do we take them, operationalize them, and deploy them at the edge.
Thanks, Victor. Ken, the next question is for you. You have, especially for your tax business, you have completed all these implementations. And incidentally, you actually selected Databricks as a key solution platform to implement this. And of course, you use Infosys as a partner. But the key question is that how did Databricks work out as a AI backbone for you?
Yeah, and even before we go into it becoming an AI backbone, the question is, why did we pick it to be our foundational data backbone? And so, I like to think of the world of ETL before Spark and after Spark. Before the era of Databricks, after the era of Databricks. Does anyone here actually remember how we used to do ETL before Spark? It's like it's traumatic, right? I don't even want to go back and flash back, right? So it's almost like synonymous now with the idea of using it for ETL and sort of the battle between in-memory computation for ETL is over, right? And then if you look at the same construct, right? Who do you want to work with when it comes to open systems around, hey, storage file formats where you can apply a semantic layer on top of Parquet? Well, the numbers don't lie, right? You're looking at things like Delta Lake, hey, and then what is the need for now in the world of AI to sort of make your models more portable? What should be the foundational interoperable format for exchanging models across clouds? Well, who created MLflow, right? So it gradually builds upon itself. You start with the data prep, then you put a little bit more structure on top of it for asset compliance, and then finally you have sort of this model portability to it. So we've been there really early with our partnership with Databricks and Microsoft, and it was sort of a no-brainer for us. I think the really exciting thing now is about governing these algorithms, not just governing data. And so, there's a lot of excitement around sort of the observability aspect of AI and the observability aspect of governance and actually having this sort of nudge behavior against our risk officers and saying, hey, per the demo today, you saw something happen to a model, maybe someone needs to go and wake up that risk officer or that model steward or algorithmic steward. We started using that language to go and control that algorithm. So I think those were the decisions, right? But I think if I could summarize it into sort of one word, it really comes down to open standards, right? Openness, right? So I think that's what was the big decision for us.
Thanks, Ken. Victor, next question is for yourself. So Victor, you talked about all the use cases, and actually those benefits were pretty significant, right, at a fab level. I mean, some of the fab with some of the use cases getting like $200K and dollars worth of benefits, 500K, thousands of parts and inventory, automated with AI and all that. It wouldn't have been easy, not at all easy, actually. So what were the learnings that you have? And if there were anything that you would like to do differently to make it even better for you, and something which the audience would like to hear, like how could I have done these things differently, or what you learned during the process?
Yeah, if I have to sum it up in one line, I would say, I'm going to use a cliche here, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? The concept of weak AI, if we could provide any capability, any benefit to our partners in business to help them do their job by a factor of, 20, 30, 40%, Because you got to think about it, before the advent of ML or AI or any of these concepts, it was either, it was binary. Either a solution works 100% all the time or it doesn't. But think about all the manual, laborious processes which were in the equation before the advent of these capabilities. So I guess being transparent, being open, providing our business partners that awareness that a lot of this work is going to be extremely experimental in nature. In some cases, as you go about doing the EDA, the exploratory data analysis, you would get a good sense with the right partnership whether this requires, mandates machine learning and AI-based solution, yes or no. Not all problems have to be solved using a machine learning-based solution. Sometimes the solutions, the fixes are a lot easier than having one of the most complex deep neural networks go solve that problem for you. So in our case, it was that partnership. It was discussing the art of possible, right? When organization, traditional IT organizations, I got to be honest, we are a 50, 60-year-old company. It wasn't easy to scale. Technology, I learned, is one of the easiest things to scale. Change of mindset, changing the way to think, getting the right partners along with you is one of the most complex things. So from our perspective, make sure you set those expectations right. Do you have access to the data? What is the quality of the data? Do you have access to people who've got the domain knowledge of the data? That's extremely critical, right? Without which that data is, you could not, in your sifting process, figure out where is the signal in all this noise, because you don't have expertise as far as the data domain is concerned. We found as we went about deploying 30-odd models in our production environment, you notice our POCs were in hundreds. The places where the stickability index, the value was higher, is where there was right partnership, access to the right data, and the domain knowledge of the data was extremely critical. So for those of you who are early in the journey, some of these pointers hopefully will help you out.
Thanks, Victor. That's very helpful. So, Ken, this question is for you. You have, especially from your tax business perspective, you have successfully onboarding now. I mean, with different clients and doing the AI from a whole taxation perspective, and actually scaling it across various business areas and geographies. So, in spite of the success, are there something that you would like to do differently, or something that you have learned that should have been, could be done better? Can you talk about those?
So I think that despite all the open standards and despite all the connectors that we're hearing about, integration across ecosystems, particularly multi-cloud hops, is still incredibly difficult. And when you start getting telemetry for that around chargeback models, especially if you have to put the cost to the end customer at a Fortune 500, you realize very quickly that cloud economics is not easy. And I like to say that we really just have one use case for AI, and it's our managed services business. We're not an AI company. We're a managed services business. We rule that space when it comes to the CFO space, and now increasingly the intersection of the CFO risk and COO space. And so the big question for us is, how do we create those integration patterns now across clouds in the context of not only ML ops, but also LLM ops, right? And we've made significant progresses with technologies like MLflow, et cetera, and the broader set of technologies out there around governance and model portability, communications across multiple Databricks clusters, across multiple clouds, and so on and so forth. But now as we move towards the world of LLM ops, that problem becomes exponentially more difficult. So we were really early in investing in ML ops. Now we're getting really early in the world of LLM ops, right? So I'm hoping that will pay dividends for us as we think about the world we're entering, but I still think that it's an incredibly difficult job. And I think the culmination of a lot of what we're doing is connecting low-code stacks for tax practitioners at the forefront of a managed services engagement with these back-end complex data engineering, data and AI complex workflows. So how do you make that easy, right? Databricks is still something that frightens everybody from a tax practitioner mindset perspective. They don't know how to necessarily even code SQL sometimes. So I think this key takeaway from, the most exciting takeaway for me from this keynote was, the language, natural language becoming a querying technology. That's something that tax practitioners can understand. And now it's a question of, well, how well will that perform against really complex jurisdiction regulatory specific schemas? That is our IP, and we don't want necessarily anybody else to go take a look at, right? So, it's an exciting time, but it's still, the same challenges still apply, which is, it's very hard to integrate across ecosystems, and it's only going to get harder.
Thanks, Ken. We are out of time also. So any questions from the audience for any of these three panelists? Quick questions. Go ahead, please.
Hello, sorry. So my question is more towards, Ken, I believe you said that E&Y is considering MLOps as providing as a service. So I'm sure E&Y has a ton of clients. So how do you make sure each and every client's requirement and data fit into your model? And what are the transformation steps or challenges that you have faced, if you can talk about that?
We're taking a federated approach to AI, so we are actually creating model stewards and governance stewards in a distributed fashion. When you think about serving a Fortune 500, even sometimes at a specific country, specific region, or even a specific jurisdiction, the needs change. And so I am often much more interested in narrow AI problems than I am in broad AI problems. And then the same thing applies from a governance perspective, right? So we've been talking a lot about this idea of policy as code, and how do we use technologies such as, for example, Yamuta and some of the things you saw today, and also democratizing governance and creating toolkits for risk officers and governance officers, even all the way down to an engagement level if need be necessary to provide that kind of control. It's early days, and we're starting with broader strokes of governance and a lot of manual work and hand-holding, but I'm hopeful that we'll get to a place where governance will also become sort of this policy as a code engine DevOps problem.